Hi, everybody. Welcome to yet another episode. And Stephen's got another banger for me. Hopefully, it doesn't set me off like one of the previous ones we did. But this one is boundaries. You've come to that. Well, come to me with that quite cold. So, what do you mean specifically in your world about boundaries, and what's come up lately for you to bring that one up for us to talk about?
Yeah, this one's an interesting one. This is like a barbershop discussion. And those of you that know what I'm talking about when I talk about discussion, normally in hairdressers and barbers all around the world, there's always a topic of conversation. There's always something that is debate. There's always something that happened, and someone will start telling the story, and then everyone sort of piles in. And that's where the boundary ones come from for me. And it's been based on a lot of feedback where a lot of clients have been saying, I need to set some healthy boundaries because I'm really starting to struggle in life because I don't have these boundaries and people are impeding on my life, on my time, on my work. And it's really, really affecting me. And it just made me think for a while that we don't actually talk enough to people around what we're happy with and what we're happy to accept. So what tends to happen is people just either go too close to the bone. We haven't created the boundary, so there's no line, so they go way over it. And because we're not confident enough sometimes to sort of approach that person and say, well, actually, that doesn't sit right with me, or actually, that's not how I see it. And I think our ability to set these healthy boundaries is something that we all need to think about because I think it will make life a million times easier for us. I've seen a lot of people really struggle with this. And actually, by setting the boundaries, healthy boundaries in particular, it allows you to have that breathing space. Example, no, I don't want to go. I don't feel comfortable being on the beach in my, half naked. I'm happy to go with my t-shirt and my shorts on, but I don't feel comfortable going half naked. You put me in a position where I have to do that doesn't make me feel comfortable, and and that's just one example. Another example where um, we all have grandparents and we all have people that we call on sometimes to help us maybe with babysitting, those of us that have got children. If we don't create a healthy boundary, that grandparent can sometimes feel that they're not a grandparent. They can feel like, oh, we're just at your beck and call as and when, because the boundary hasn't been set. Well, actually, because I have so and so every Thursday, I don't really want to have them on a weekend as well. And it's setting those kind of boundaries that make our life a lot easier. So that's what I mean by that, Oliver. You can see I'm quite passionate about it, but it's definitely one that's definitely been a barbershop and hairdresser conversation for me.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to get people thinking because it immediately got my mind spiraling over, springing rather into lots of different directions. Because I was thinking about banter at work, especially if banter is coming from someone in a more senior position and it's making people feel awkward, and then they want to try and raise it, but they know that the kind of banter that we're getting, it's going to get, I don't know, not well received. That's going to be a challenge, isn't it? And then there's situations of like when you're contacting people, because there are hours of work when it's okay to speak to people. But if you don't set the boundaries early doors, people calling you well and truly outside of the contracted hours. Now, whilst you won't necessarily be rigid about that, you've clearly taken a role, or you've got something you're involved with, maybe outside of work, with friends or families or community or something. But it needs to be clear when you're available to do that. And it maybe needs to be clear that, say, 7 p.m. now, I'm putting my kids to bed at that time. I'm reading bedtime stories. I won't be available for said thing, whether that be work or community as well. So, there's so many things that people don't realize might be crossing other people's boundaries. And, I think people are a bit more aware of this now because obviously there's so much stuff around about how you speak to people, what you can and can't call people, things like that. I can see how people could make mistakes now quite easily, especially so-called old school. You mentioned grandparents earlier, and some of the things that my grandparents have said. I mean, I don't have any anymore. They've all all pass, but the conversations I would have with them to help them understand why that just is not okay. I mean, I'm not going into specific details on here, but they're a different time. That doesn't make it okay, but it also doesn't mean there's any good berating them. But at the same time, I wasn't prepared to put up with it, so I would have to educate them in the most non-patronizing way I possibly could. But it's that communication piece. We've talked about it in other podcasts, haven't we? So making sure, I think, as a final point, if you're in a place, a situation, relationship, family, or business where you don't think you can have conversations about what makes you uncomfortable or what you are prepared to put up with and so forth, then there's probably a wider issue that you maybe need to address. So I don't know how you feel about that, Stephen, but what are your thoughts on what I've just said?
Yeah, it hits home actually. And for those of you that this particular subject matter may cause a little bit of distress, please feel free to reach out to me or Oliver or someone that you feel comfortable to talk to, because this subject matter does sort of unearth things. And something I want to talk to you now is something that, you know, I've really suffered with in my life. And my daughter's now struggling with the same thing. And that is the need for people to touch our hair. I don't know what it is. And any person of color listening to this podcast right now will understand what I mean, where someone thinks that it's perfectly okay, generally someone from the white community, to touch your hair and make a comment about it. And I never quite understand, like, would you do that to my white counterpart? No. So why do you feel the need to now touch my hair?
No one's ever
And it
touched
really
my
is a
hair.
thing. And I've heard many people talk about it on various television shows, podcasts. It's even been rapped about. It's been in lyrics that people feel the need to touch your hair. And it's what's difficult about it then is you then have to set that boundary around that's not okay. I do not want you to touch my hair. Why are you making comments or touching my hair when you wouldn't do that to the person to my left or the person to my right? And it's that sort of thing. And I guess it's the person that then feels uncomfortable having to actually talk about that around why that's not comfortable. I don't feel comfortable with you doing that. And that's just one thing from me, Oliver. And it talking about these boundaries is really sort of, you know, really hit home around that. And I guess sometimes that whole thing around boundaries can really it can be really nerve wracking having to talk to someone and explain to someone why that's not okay.
Yeah, that first of all, that's outrageous. But obviously, being very white and having very little hair, it's not an issue that I've come across. To be fair, but I'm staggered that that is a thing. Wow! Now you've told me, not a surprise. To be fair, but that's incredible. And I can only apologise on behalf of all those people that have done that. That they thought that that was okay. And it is amazing what people think they can do in actual fact when it gets me thinking more about you know certain things that I've seen and witnessed, and it's like boundaries are. I'm quite opinionated, it's fair to say, and I have done a lot of work with myself to become less so out of an environment like this. In here I feel it's okay, it's fair game, but there are many times where I want to say something and I don't know what the driver is. Might be ego, might be all sorts of things, but I've managed to button it. So it is possible to not do it. So for those people that have urges to do things to other people and so forth, maybe just have a little think about that first and foremost. But secondly, if you're having somebody who is pushing boundaries with you, you need to be able to speak to them. And if there is any fear around speaking to them, then there needs to be a real hard look at why you're around that person or these people. Because I can assure you right now, if you're listening with any doubt, the problem ain't with you. And you might feel that it is. You, especially if I go back to my earlier small sort of potentially light-hearted thing around banter in the workplace. Just because you might be in an office with 9 other people who find that funny and you don't, doesn't make you odd. It just makes you outnumbered in that environment, and they're unlikely to change. So you probably need to consider that environment, to be perfectly honest. But if you feel brave enough, you can certainly raise it. But if it's just one person, then it's potentially easier to challenge, isn't it? But depends where you're at and how to do it. But I think the piece I want to reinforce, like with you saying there, what you've just done, and when someone asks you to, if they, well, don't even ask, someone just touches your hair without permission, absolutely 100%, you're in the right to feel outraged by that, and that's not okay. And the same thing, if any of your spidey senses are tingling when an incident is happening, where someone's maybe ringing you 2 hours after you've left work and asking you to do something, you're right. It's not okay, you know? So even if you feel you can't challenge it, to at least just be reassured that you're not going, you're not going against the grain. You're not being difficult. You're not being rude. Your boundaries just aren't, the boundaries haven't been set well by wherever you're at, and obviously you've not felt comfortable with setting your own boundary. So I think that's a real big message that I would like to get out from this, is if you're having these doubts, it's okay. And rather, like was Stephen said earlier, reach out to anyone. I mean, obviously us two are always happy to have a chat, but anybody, and just see what they think. Somebody who's not involved in that circle, that environment, ask their third person opinion, because they will definitely be on your side. And in the occasions where that isn't quite the case, they might be able to articulate to you why. But most of the time, I should imagine you need to trust your gut, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And all these things start with a feeling, right? And it's about how you feel, and your feelings are important. And that's what you're trying to protect here with healthy boundaries. And I think where the issue comes in is when you don't feel that the environment is safe, or you feel comfortable or confident enough to challenge that. And I think that's where this becomes quite difficult for people. And this is why I'm saying I'm not talking here and making out that this is an easy one, because it might not be easy. It might be something that you have to take away, reflect how you will potentially deliver that, but don't ignore it, because that's how that makes you feel. You know, I've spoken to female friends in the past where things have happened where the other person thinks it's okay to touch your shoulder or touch your arm. That person might think that's okay in a certain setting, or think that's all right. But if that's not all right with you, it's within your power to say, I'm not comfortable with that. And I think this is, and this is where this all stems from. It's about how something makes you feel. And if you're not comfortable with it, being able to articulate that and having that conversation to say, actually, I'm not happy about that. It doesn't feel right. And it is such a sensitive subject, because it's what I've always said. Just because it's okay with one person doesn't mean that's okay with everybody. And this is where setting the boundaries is critical, but also thinking about, have I overstepped the mark there? Is that the right behavior in that environment? Have I said the right thing there? So also challenging yourself to see if you may have overstepped the mark, or whether you've gone too far with a scenario. I think there's both sides to this one, in terms of the boundary setting, but also being comfortable to be able to challenge, and thirdly, to be able to think about your behaviour. What was that right? Was that okay? Did you leave that person feeling um, in the right frame of mind based on your conversation or the words that you use? Does that? What do you think to that, Oliver?
Yeah, that actually is a really interesting one, because I think of it now. The amount of times I'll have conversations, sometimes with clients, sometimes with friends, other people, where they're talking about something that's really offended them or peed them off or whatever, and it's not okay. And I'm like, but hang on, hold on. That's all right. I understand where you're coming from, but do you remember when you did this or when you said that? And we kind of feel like we've got a bit of double standards here because you're a bit upset about this thing that's happened, which you're absolutely right to be upset by. But do you remember when you did this other thing over here? So that self reflection piece is really, really important, actually, because if you're feeling offended by something or upset by something, or that your boundaries have been in some way, shape, or form violated, just be sure that you aren't doing that to somebody else because you know damn well how it feels. Now, maybe what you've done isn't as severe as what you're feeling, but maybe it is. Doesn't really matter, does it? Because for that other person, they're getting a level of the same feeling, frustration, disappointment, upset, whatever it is that you are. And I think that's really valuable. And it's one of the things, people talk about, do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself or something like that, isn't it? And it's kind of a bit of like that because I know in my earlier career, I've talked a few times about the fact I was not the best manager. I was a bit abrupt with people, should we say. And I never liked that back. I never enjoyed it. So where on earth did I think that it was okay to be, forceful and abrupt and potentially borderline aggressive sometimes with other people? Because if anyone did it to me, I was strong enough to give it back. But that doesn't make it okay. They shouldn't have done it, but I shouldn't have been doing it elsewhere. Just because those people had the balls to stand up to me, whereas other people didn't, what does that mean? I'm still very much in the wrong. So what that really took from that is the first thing, obviously reach out. But that whole self-reflection piece actually is a really important thing to feel missed, because I think there's a lot of a situation where you can feel that, oh, it's being done to me. And like, well, let's just make sure that outside of that environment, you aren't causing the same pain. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Oliver. And it's about the passage that you said there, which actually I think is in the Bible as well, about do unto others, what you would do to yourself. So always reflect and think, is that right? Am I treating that person right? Have I gone too far? So that self-reflection is really, really important. And I know sometimes in the moment we can say things and do things that's not right, but we should always have the ability to think about it afterwards. And if we feel that we haven't acted right or said the right thing, go back and say, actually, last week or yesterday when we were having that conversation, I've reflected and I'd like to just address that again, because someone will forgive you for doing that. I think what's not acceptable is if you take the high road and think, no, what I said was perfectly fine. Because the reality is, it's how, I will always remember this. It's not what you say. It's not how you say it. It's how you leave someone feeling. And I think that's what this is really all about with boundaries. It's how you leave someone feeling. Just because you think that's okay, that doesn't mean that they think it's okay. And if you've said or done something that's made someone feel uncomfortable, then accept that and accept that's not right for them. We're all very different. We all have a very different DNA. There's a reason why we're all very different. And that means things affect us differently and things make us all feel very differently. So yeah, definitely a real heartfelt one today, but one which I think everyone will be able to resonate in some shape or form, Oliver.
Yeah, I love that. I feel it's a really powerful one for a number of people who've been listening. And it's already given me a couple of topics for future episodes, which I'll give a few spoilers away now. I'm going to lambast Stephen to agree to do the power of apology as an episode, and also we're all different as an episode. So you've got those ones coming in the future weeks and months, as long as we get an agreement. Which people who've been following the series will now have known what I think about agreements and things like that. So there we go. Anyway, that's enough from me. I feel that's been really valuable. Anything you want to add as a final thought, Stephen?
Yeah, just one thing for me, and that is, do not be afraid to set those boundaries. You owe it to yourself, and you will feel so much better as you go through life.
Awesome. Love that. Right, as always, guys, thanks very much for listening, and we look forward to speaking to you and seeing you on the next one. Cheers.